Speaker Newt Gingrich. Speaker Gingrich, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke has called unemployment in this country a national crisis due to the amount of days people are out, months that people are out of work, and the number of people out of work. Many of you have come up with tax reform plans. Why is tax reform the path to job creation? And if it's not the only path, what else can you implement to get people back to work?
Well, first of all, I think Ben Bernanke is a large part of the problem and ought to be fired as rapidly as possible. I think the Federal Reserve ought to be audited, and we should have all the decision documents for 2008, 9, and 10 so we can understand who he bailed out, why he bailed them out, who he did not bail out, and why he did not bail them out. So I'm glad that Ben Bernanke recognizes some of the wreckage his policies have led to. The reason we follow, I think most of us, are for tax policies that lead to jobs is because we've had two cycles in my lifetime, Ronald Reagan and the Contract with America, both of which had the same policy. Lower taxes, less regulation, more American energy, and have faith in the American job creator as distinct from a Saul Alinsky radicalism of higher taxes, bigger bureaucracy with more regulations, no American energy, as the president announced again today in his decision on offshore, and finally, class warfare. So I would say that all of us on this stage represent a dramatically greater likelihood of getting to a paycheck and leaving behind food stamps than does Barack Obama.
Do you think that companies can both be profitable and be able to create jobs? Mr. Speaker, how about to you? Can corporations do both?
Sure. Look, obviously, corporations can and should do both. And what is amazing to me is the inability of much of our academic world, much of our news media, and most of the people on Occupy Wall Street to have a clue about history. In this town, Henry Ford started as an Edison Electric supervisor who went home at night and built his first car in the garage. Now, was he in the 99% or the 1%? Bill Gates drops out of college to found Microsoft. Is he in the 1% or the 99%? Historically, this is the richest country in the history of the world because corporations succeed in creating both profits and jobs, and it's sad that the news media doesn't report accurately how the economy works.
What is the media reporting inaccurately about the economy?
What?
What is the media reporting inaccurately about the economy?
I love humor disguised as a question. That's terrific. I have yet to hear a single reporter ask a single Occupy Wall Street person a single rational question about the economy that would lead them to say, for example, who's going to pay for the park you're occupying if there are no businesses making a profit?
Most economists agree that there can be no economic recovery without a recovery in housing. American families have lost some $7 trillion in home value in the last 5 years. Right now, 4 million people are behind on their mortgage or in foreclosure. 25% of homeowners owe more to the banks than their house is actually worth. Governor Romney has said that the government should let the foreclosure process play out so that the housing market can recover and the free markets can work. Speaker Gingrich, is Governor Romney right?
Well, he's certainly right in the sense that you want to get through to the real value of the houses as fast as you can, because they're not going to rise in value as long as you stay trapped, as Japan has done now for 20 years. But I think there are two specific steps you've got to understand in terms of housing. To pick up on something Congressman Bachmann said, if the Republican House next week would repeal Dodd-Frank and allow us to put pressure on the Senate to repeal Dodd-Frank, you'd see the housing market start to improve overnight. Dodd-Frank kills small banks, it kills small business, the federal regulators are anti-housing loan, and it has maximized the pain level. You could also change some of the rules so that it'll be easier to do a short sale where the house is worth less than the mortgage than it is to do a foreclosure. Today, the banks are actually profiting more by foreclosing than by encouraging short sales. But in the long run, if you want the housing market to come back, the economy has to come back. When you're at 4% unemployment, you suddenly have a dramatic increase in demand for housing. When you're at 9% plus unemployment, it's hard to get the housing market to come back.
Speaker Gingrich, 30 seconds to you. Your firm was paid $300,000 by Freddie Mac in 2006. What did you do for that money?
Were you asking me?
Yes.
Sure, I offered them advice on precisely what they didn't do. Look, this is not...
Were you not trying to help Freddie Mac fend off the effort by the Bush administration?
No, I have never done
Freddie Mac?
I assume I get a second question. I have never done any lobbying. Every contract that was written during the period when I was out of the office specifically said I would do no lobbying, and I offered advice. And my advice as a historian, when they walked in and said to me, we are now making loans to people who have no credit history and have no record of paying back anything, but that's what the government wants us to do, as I said to them at the time, this is a bubble. This is insane. This is impossible. It turned out, unfortunately, I was right, and the people who were doing exactly what Congressman Bachmann talked about were wrong. And I think it's a good case for breaking up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and getting much smaller institutions back into the private sector to be competitive and to be responsible for their behavior.
You have all said that you will repeal President Obama's health care legislation. Down the line, 30 seconds. If you repeal Obamacare, what's the answer? Mr. Speaker.
Well, I just want to point out my colleagues have done a terrific job of answering an absurd question. To say in 30 seconds...
You have said you want to repeal Obamacare, correct?
Let me just finish, if I may.
30 seconds. Okay.
To say in 30 seconds what you would do with 18% of the economy, life and death for the American people, a topic I've worked on since 1974, about which I wrote a book called Saving Lives and Saving Money in 2002, and for which I founded the Center for Health Transformation, is the perfect case of why I'm going to challenge the president to 7 Lincoln Douglas-style 3-hour debates with a timekeeper and no moderator, at least 2 of which ought to be on health care, so you could have a serious discussion over a several-hour period that affects the lives of every person in this country.
Would you like to try to explain? Would you like to try to explain, in simple speak, to the American people what you would do after you repeal the president's health care legislation?
In 30 seconds.
Take the time you need, sir. Take the time you need.
I can't take what I need. These guys will all gang up on me.
Do you want to answer the question tonight on health care? No, Speaker. You want to try to answer the question tonight, Speaker?
Let me just say it very straight. One, you go back to a doctor-patient relationship and you involve the family in those periods where the patient by themselves can't make key decisions. But you relocalize it. 2, as several people said, including Governor Perry, you put Medicaid back at the state level and allow the states to really experiment, because it's clear we don't know what we're doing nationally. 3, you focus very intensely on a brand new program on brain science, because the fact is the largest single out-year set of costs we're faced with are Alzheimer's, autism, Parkinson's, mental health, and things which come directly from the brain. And I am for fixing our health rather than fixing our health bureaucracy, because the iron lung is the perfect model of saving people, so you don't need to pay for a federal program of iron lung centers, because the polio vaccine eliminated the problem. That's a very short précis.
Congresswoman.
Speaker Gingrich, for the first time in its 75-year history, Social Security is going to be in the red. According to the Washington Post on October 29th, $105 billion this year. The reason? Political parties, both sides, the end of last year agreed that they wanted a tax cut. And the area they cut were payroll taxes, the main funding for Social Security. If we continue that, and there seems to be some agreement on both sides of the aisle to extend that tax cut, for 2011 and 2012, the cumulative amount will be closer to $260 billion. Are all tax cuts created equal? Is this a tax cut that you would back?
Well, I'm not prepared to raise taxes on working Americans in the middle of a recession that's this bad. But let me put Social Security in context. In 1968, in order to fake a balanced budget, Lyndon Johnson brought Social Security into the general budget. And ever since, politicians have hid behind Social Security. Now it's going to become a disadvantage to do so. I think the first step is you take Social Security off the federal budget. You don't try to solve the budget deficit problem on the back of working Americans and retirees. You deal with Social Security as a freestanding issue. And the fact is, if you allow younger Americans to have the choice to go to a Galveston or Chilean-style personal Social Security savings account, the long-term effect on Social Security is scored by the Social Security actuary as absolutely stabilizing the the system and taking care of it. The key is there's $2.4 trillion in Social Security, which should be off budget. And no president of the United States should ever again say, because of some political fight in Washington, I may not be able to send you your check. That money is sitting there, that money is available, and the country ought to pay the debt it owes the people who put the money in.
Speaker Gingrich, Congressman Paul just talked about a bubble, and there are many that are concerned that unlike other types of debt, student loan debt does not have the same type of consumer protections. It cannot be wiped out in bankruptcy by law. There's really little way to refinance it. Are you worried about student loan debt becoming the next government bailout?
You know, this is a good place to talk about the scale of change we're about to live through. We're at the end of the welfare state era of dependency, debt, distortion, and dishonesty. The student loan program began when Lyndon Johnson announced it, I think, with a $15 million program. It's an absurdity. What does it do? It expands the ability of students to stay in college longer because they don't see the cost. It actually means they take fewer hours per semester on average. It takes longer for them to get through school. It allows them to tolerate tuitions going up absurdly. By 2014, there will be one administrator for every teacher on college campuses in the United States. Now, let me give you a contrast that's very startling. The College of the Ozarks is a work-study college. You cannot apply to it unless you need student aid, and they have no student aid. You have to work 20 hours a week during the year to pay tuition and books. You work 40 hours a week during the summer to pay for room and board. 92% of the students graduate owing no debt. The 8% who owe debt owe $5,000 because they bought a car. Now, that is a model so different, it will be culture shock for the students of America to learn we actually expect them to go to class, study, get out quickly, charge as little as possible, and emerge debt-free by doing the right things for 4 years.
In addition to that, so many companies, multinational companies, want to try to get a foothold in China and sell to the 1.5 billion people there. They can only do joint ventures. They are not getting a fair shake in terms of selling to that 1.5 billion person population. How would you move the needle?
Well, there are two things here, and let me say in advance that I would yield in part to Governor Huntsman because he speaks fluent Chinese, he's worked in China, and he's been the ambassador, and I'd be curious to get his reaction. But there are two different parts here. The problem with building the bridge is simple. What is it about American regulations, American taxation, American labor cost and attitudes that makes it cheaper to go to China than to go to the United States? Now, let's see, first of all, you've got to decide how are we going to be more competitive and how are we going to be the lowest cost? And there's a new Boston consulting study that says by 2015, South Carolina and Alabama will be cheaper than the Chinese coastal provinces to manufacture in. Second, in terms of dealing with China strategically, I think we're going to have to find ways to dramatically raise the pain level for the Chinese cheating, both in the hacking side, but also on the stealing and intellectual property side. And I don't think anybody today has a particularly good strategy for doing that.